Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the most fearful of them all?
Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. 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 Prisoner 819 did a bad thing.
Welcome to another rendition of Radio Tipping Point. My name is Mike Boyle, and our show today is titled, I'm Not Here. And if you're familiar with the games that little kids play, or at least I played it when I was younger, where you would think if you close your eyes, then everything around you simply disappears. And of course, we have various versions of this children's game that we continue to play as adults. The most common, I would say, these days is tied to the online world, and certainly that world that we have been going through for the last 2+ years, where if we decide we are no longer here, we turn off the video, we turn off the microphone, and we slip into passive mode. We have decided that we are not going to be active. We will take in this information, or maybe not. Maybe we will work on other activities while the online proceeds continue. But we've more or less made the decision we are not there. In the Huxleyan prophecy, Big Brother does not watch us by his choice. We watch him by ours. There is no need for wardens or gates or ministries of truth. This show, as such, was based on impressions that I started collecting right at the time of the first lockdown. So from one certain perspective, I could say that it's taken 2 years for me to complete it. But in fact, that journey has been much longer, and in fact I started to realize when going through the exercise in getting ready for this show that I have been working on this concept for a very, very long time. So, what do I mean by this idea? Not here. I gave you an example of how we can slip into this not here mode. But what drives us to not want to be here? Well, the immediate thought that comes to mind is that we are simply not mentally capable of dealing with the present, and for whatever reason. And the not here is a way for us to escape from a situation that maybe has become too overwhelming. There is nothing wrong with entertainment. As some psychiatrists once put it, we all build castles in the air. The problems come when we try to live in them. Another reason why we choose the not here path is very much tied to the idea that our attention span cannot take any more data. And I am not referring to a set of actions or a certain approach that is unique for any group, because I've caught myself falling into the not here mode as well. Especially when I just want to listen, I don't want to participate, then the natural reaction would be to choose the not here approach. And of course, that becomes a bit complicated when the individual or individuals on the other side are expecting activity to take place. And I'm just being honest, sometimes I don't want to be active. Another situation that causes a number of individuals to go into the not here mode, what I've noticed, is when the circumstances become way too complex. And very possibly we might be talking about a situation that is on the border of being absurd. So we have the option of continuing and being active in the conversations, in the actions, and heaven forbid if we fall into the sunk cost fallacy, where we then think, well, we've invested so much time so far, we can't stop now. And then you could become deeper and deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole, where we find ourselves swimming feverishly to keep our head above water in the ocean of absurdity. And especially tied to a special conditioning that I've seen over the years, where certainly this condition has existed probably forever. I haven't been around forever, so I cannot vouch that one way or the other. But I tend to think it's been around for a long, long time. I just get the impression that today it's much more pronounced, that individuals simply do not want to deal with As long as we're capable of keeping the conversation, the actions respected, and the level of stimulus all somewhat on an even keel, then we're basing virtually everything on stimulus response. Stimulus response. Stimulus response. And any situation that might deviate from stimulus response, well, we just can't compute it anymore. And so with that, we go into not here mode. Because we are no longer capable, not just from a cognitive level, but also on an emotional level. We are not capable of dealing with anything else apart from stimulus response. So we bail. We are no longer there. And lest we forget the concept of boredom. Which is a state that I believe we probably have the biggest fear of today. We have to, because if indeed boredom was considered to be normal or expected, or perhaps, just perhaps, maybe even desired, then we wouldn't have this aversion to the state. Oh my gosh, we're all alone. Oh my gosh, our mental processes are not being diverted. One more time. Oh my gosh. I don't know what to do. Or maybe, oh my gosh, it might stir some emotions that I don't know what to deal with, or I don't know how to deal with, better said. And that possibly might be our biggest fear when looking at boredom. Because it means we are devoid of being occupied in some fashion. Which might cause us to acknowledge some things possibly about ourselves that we perhaps might prefer to keep buried. But yes, folks, there are some other reasons why we strive towards not heardom. The other very prominent state that I see quite often is tied to the avoidance of conflict. We know within virtually all relationships This is an unscientific prognosis from my end. But I trust myself to go out on a limb and say that within most relationships we are playing some sort of role, either as being dominant or submissive. And it's very possible that within a relationship or relationships that these roles can be exchanged through time, very possibly even within the realm of one individual conversation. And within those roles, and let's assume you have fallen within the submissive persona, and you're confronted with an individual who is probably by nature somewhat dominant. The last thing we want to do is challenge them. Sometimes it requires courage. Sometimes it requires a lot of energy. Sometimes it acts as a trigger for various consequences that take place that maybe we would just like to avoid at all costs. Although it's all right, and very often, if put in a non-threatening way, could be a real game changer, because maybe we've read too much into that conversation based upon these perceived roles that we're taking on, that the other person doesn't even realize. And very possibly our biggest fear is that we're afraid those people aren't going to like us anymore. Which is actually a very strong statement, because that means that our actions are based upon externals, and not having perhaps a feeling of self-worth. And going one step further, being willing to fight for those things that you believe in. There is another situation where I think the not heardom raises its head. And it's tied to those things going on around us that we do not want to be associated with. We do not want to be identified with those things taking place. So we don't confront them. We just enter not heardom. And within our pseudo transparent society, the lack of privacy has to be a big cause, at least in my book, of not heardom. And we know of the difficulties that social media have caused a number of us in protecting that private sphere. The last 2 years have made this very pronounced. I think of situations where you all of a sudden are contacting colleagues, either from the workplace or business associates, or perhaps even customers. And before you were always in a neutral environment, and now all of a sudden you're broadcasting from home. So you look at the background and you think, oh wow, I expected them to have better taste than they have within their house or their apartment. And looky there, they have a bookshelf. Let's see what books they have. So zoom in and look at the titles of the books. Which means that all of a sudden we are divulging something about ourselves that never would have been part of any conversation. Perhaps the trust factor is not there to reveal such information. That sense of vulnerability is just way too strong. So, best not to go down that road. And I think for a number of individuals, especially in the beginning, they were not even aware of what they were divulging about themselves. But we learned, and that caused not heardom to become even more prevalent. And then there's the case of being afraid of possibly sticking out. Because, of course, by sticking out, you are possibly an object of attack. Or if you're like me, who probably throughout the years has always stuck out in some fashion, not through any brilliance, not through anything intentional. Well, let's say for the most part. Sometimes it has been intentional. But just in the way that you are, the way that you think, the way you act, that of course has a number of sources, you just seem to stick out. And that means, like it or not, You have to be ready for possible repercussions because we have a lot of vultures in our society that relish in tearing down other individuals because they do not feel good about themselves. So let's go ahead and make this an even playing field. Make sure that everybody's miserable. And I tend to think you all know at least a couple that fall into that category. And I suspect even for a couple of you out there, you might not necessarily acknowledge it, but in your heart of hearts, you will know that I am talking about you now. Here's a quote that I found coming out of the late 40s, I believe. So we're talking about something that's over 80 years old. Even among those interviewed who took piano lessons, musical interest as such seemed virtually non-existent. One boy of 14 did appear to have genuine musical interest, playing classics on the piano. His mother told the interviewer, however, she was not letting him practice too much, lest he get out of step with the other boys, and was insisting that he excel in sports. I hope to keep him a normal boy, she said. And of course that means if you are no longer normal, which very often within our society infers that we are basing everything within the lowest common denominator. Don't show that you're too intelligent. Don't show too many emotions. Don't show that you have different interests. And let's not even talk about those things that, although we have made some inroads, we still have a long ways to go. Either your ethnicity or your sexual preference. Or, very sad to say, normal things that are not to be found within the feminine realm. So these are all reasons. I'm not justifying the reasons. I'm not saying that they are all to be avoided. Because sometimes they're just way too convenient. But if we're not capable, at least coming up with a list of why we choose not to be there, then we continue on our merry old way, and then we continue to wonder why things are the way they are. If we are to evaluate this concept of not heardom, and to look at the condition, look at the choice, look at the repercussions, perhaps more on a meta level, then we need to break things up into the external and the internal. And if you think about those things that I've been mentioning so far, about an external situation, the external response that becomes overwhelming and we decide to click out, or maybe the complexity of the externals. Conflict is, for the most part, an external. You could have internal conflict. I think it probably happens more than we tend to acknowledge. Identity, and on the larger realm, identity politics is clearly an external. Privacy, clearly external. And the fear of sticking out is based upon the impressions we leave within that external realm. That means that all of these impulses are coming from the outside. So when we talk about anxiety, that leads me to believe this is completely an internal matter. Something that we do not feel sovereign. Very often we do not feel empowered. Although I tend to think that the two, sovereignty and empowerment, are probably a married pair. And of course, this is a subject that I talk about quite often, the situational versus the dispositional. We might be afraid of the devils that might raise their ugly heads due to a situation that has suddenly taken place, where we are shocked by our own behavior, something that is buried deep inside us. Something perhaps we weren't even aware of. Something that we continue to suppress as much as possible. And the real anxiety comes from those internal devils that we have. Can it just be the devils? I never even thought of this before. Can it possibly be those internal angels that that causes anxiety? I would argue yes, because if it does not fit within this model, this picture we have in our heads of who we are, then of course we cannot figure out how to control our surroundings if indeed we are to look at ourselves as being more capable, more, for lack of a better word, successful, perhaps more popular, if indeed those are the elements that you're striving for. Do you have a mental model of the world that how that would look like if indeed you were to perform the great transformation? And yes, that would be a source of anxiety. Because inevitably we think by self-control, which is not discipline. I'm not talking about discipline. I'm talking about keeping your thoughts in a certain realm, keeping your emotions within the straitjacket, that by performing these types of actions that we control our environment. But let's be honest, folks, it's an illusion. And it's just like going to the movies, where we know how it will end before it begins. And in fact, for the great majority, the big disappointment is always when it ends different than how you expected it. And in fact, that's why Hollywood has been so popular, because this sense of predictability is part of our conditioning. So if it ends up within a miserable state at the end, that's fine, because that's what you expected. If you were to have a joyful end and you didn't expect it, you don't know how to deal with it. And that's really the problem. We don't know how to deal with it. And so we would prefer always, or virtually always, to deal with situations where we know how things will end, regardless of whether they are positive or not. So we start with that picture in our mind of what that ending is going to look like. And our satisfaction comes in the control that we are able to master. And then, of course, following the concept of presence, where we try to predict the future, however miserable it may be, because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, mind you, that is not built within the here and now, but rather is based upon some sort of triggers that we have that are activated very often just when you don't expect them. Or maybe we do expect them after all. Because then we continue through the routines, meaning we are not living in the presence, but we use the triggers from the past, our preconceived notions, those emotional elements that are baked into our psyche, and we use them as being the parameters to describe how things will conclude. When a population becomes distracted by trivia, when cultural life is redefined as a perpetual round of entertainments, when serious public conversation becomes a form of baby talk, when, in short, a people become an audience and their public business is a vaudeville act, then a nation finds itself at risk. A culture death is a clear possibility. So, that not heardom is another form of escape. And escape is one that we all know quite well. Yours truly is not excluded. So when you find yourself trapped and you can't get out, whether it be a relationship or perhaps a job, or maybe even yourself, and very possibly you reached an idea where you understand that you have to perform a clean sweep to perform any type of transformation, because there are those parameters that are holding you back constantly, and they're all tied to the way that people see you. And if we're basing everything on the external, as I mentioned, so it's the way that you see yourself. So then that means that the only real solution is a clean break. Because inevitably we base our actions upon those perceptions, regardless of whether they're valid or not. And it seems to me the older we get, the more prevalent this emotional prison becomes. And I was very fortunate when I was younger I found myself, because I was probably that square peg, which I still can't explain today, although I relish in this small pegness, or yes. But that means that you don't really belong to any group. You think differently, you react differently, and you become typecast. And the longer it continues, the more difficult it becomes. So I found myself in a situation where I was about 13 years old. Where I was completely miserable. And I can remember times, and in fact it's something I hadn't thought about in a long, long time. In preparation for the show, it kind of acted as a trigger, where I would sit by myself during the so-called playtime. And then you just wish that it ends as quickly as possible. But just like the Hollywood movie, this story has a happy ending. And I was very fortunate. We moved. And I was confronted with a new set of characters that didn't know who I was. And it allowed me to to create the persona that I wanted to be, the one I thought I was, the one that needed to be tested regardless. And the situation changed 180 degrees. And going from a situation where the time couldn't go by quick enough, I found myself going to school 45 minutes early because it was so enjoyable. Through a change that I did not plan, I could not foresee, certainly nothing cognitive, although I realized afterwards, being reflective, what it actually meant. That was a revelation. That was truly a revelation. And it always comes down to these tipping point moments that we have within our life. That end up being the benchmark, our tempo, our signpost. So when you can learn that if you change the situation, you change the scenery, you change the players, either on a micro level, using my story as an example, or perhaps even from a meso within our community, or on a macro level, looking at it from a regional or a society perspective. If we change the structures, if we change the perspective, if we change the unneeded barriers that we establish, that means that we are able to accomplish much more than we realize. We just need to be able to let it happen. Quote from Seth Godin, "I feel like hiding every single day. The thing that counters it is generosity. If you can envision that you're doing this work for somebody else, then only a selfish person would choose to hide." And like that Hollywood movie scenario, that in the heart of hearts we do want a happy ending. And the good part about this one is that there is a happy ending. And that all is to be found within our own personal remit. The capability for us to create that structure, create that situation, to find the people that are supportive and not destructive, to make sure that you've created, as best you can, the conditions required for the transformation. And that's all well and good from a micro level, but on a meso level, don't even talk about a macro level, we have some serious problems that need to be addressed. Up till now, I've been focusing on the individual and that not heredom that is to be found within each persona. But we have groups within our society. I alluded to them earlier, but I think it's more than worth noting. I think it's something that we need to hammer into our consciousness every single day, that we have individuals within our society that are not there. They don't exist. They don't exist in our world. And because of that, they simply don't exist. Because we have built structures that allow them to disappear. And this list, my friends, is huge. Going from those individuals that are trying to survive every single day, either based upon their economic situation or from disabilities, in whatever form those disabilities may be. Either through ethnicity or sexual preference. And we just pass by them every single day, and I'm as guilty as anybody else. Yes, God, I am a sinner too. Yes, I am. Especially looking at the last couple of years, understanding all those individuals who were not nearly as lucky as a number, well, certainly within my groups, that actually did okay over the last 2 years. We had enough people on the battleground who were not only ignored, they were ridiculed and put in a situation as being the perpetrators of evil. And I always thought it was quite interesting when the freeway system was being built in the United States. If you look at the areas where the freeways were built, they were always through poor areas. And there were two reasons, in my opinion, why the poor areas. One, they couldn't defend themselves. So they were not there, not by choice, but they had no way to fight back. And of course, for the privileged, we made it super convenient because we didn't have to look at these people anymore. We drove right over them. And so perhaps we do not have the freeways here in the same fashion, but we have figured out ways to fly over these individuals that are not here, not by choice, but by our choice. And so, in closing, I would like to propose an open appeal for all of us to, when given the option of not being here, that we decide to show up. And we make sure those individuals who are not given the opportunity to easily say me too, that we go out of our way to bring them along for the ride. Some people show up when they need something. Some people show up before they need something, knowing that it will pay off later when they need something. And some people merely show up. not needing anything, not in anticipation of needing something, but merely because they can. So if there's one thing that I can wish for all of you, that you feel that you can show up because you can. Because that means that that ability is there, and I can't think of anything more important and beautiful to wish for all of you. Thank you very much for letting me indulge in taking your time, and look forward to our next virtual campfire together.